All right, so listeners requested a deep dive into Dennis Nilsen, and specifically, we're going off that Refinery 29 article about the Netflix doc, um, Memories of a Murderer, the Nilsen tapes.
Oh, yeah, that one's
Yeah.
pretty intense.
Yeah, it uses, for those who haven't seen it, it uses Nilsen's own recordings, like from prison,
Yeah.
to tell his story. And it's about this guy in London, early 80s, seemingly ordinary
Right.
civil servant, convicted of killing 6 young men, attempting to murder 2 others.
Right. And he confessed to even more.
Right. But here's the thing. He confessed to way more murders than that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's one of the really disturbing things is just the sheer the number, and how he went about it, right? Like luring these young men, often, homeless or struggling, back to his flat.
Yeah, that's a really important point, this idea of vulnerability
Yeah,
and who society pays attention to. And that's something the article digs into as well.
Right, right.
This idea of giving Nilsen a platform through his own words, it makes you wonder, does hearing his side of the story actually help us understand his motives?
Right.
Or does it risk giving him kind of the notoriety he might have craved?
Yeah, I mean that's the core dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're trying to understand the mind of a killer, but are we in a sense giving him exactly what he wanted?
Yeah.
A voice, an audience.
Right. And the article also pointed out something that really struck me.
Okay.
They talked about how the police missed some early opportunities to catch Nilsen.
Oh, wow.
Like, imagine the lives that could have been saved.
Yeah.
If those leads had been followed up properly.
That's chilling, isn't it? To think about the lives that could have been spared.
Yeah, it makes you think about the societal context too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It mentions this is the early 80s, a time when,
Right.
homophobia was rampant. Do you think that played a role in how the case was handled?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely a factor to consider.
Yeah.
Many of Nilsen's victims were kind of on the fringes of society. Their disappearances may not have raised the same alarm bells as they would have for others.
Right. And that raises the question then of, did societal prejudices
Right.
even subconsciously
Yeah,
impact the police investigation?
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something that, we have to consider.
Yeah, it's a really unsettling thought.
It is.
And speaking of unsettling,
Yeah.
there's one detail from the article that I can't get out of my head.
Okay.
Nilsen kept the bodies of his victims in his flat,
Uh-huh.
sometimes for extended periods, and even attempted to
Dumb.
preserve them.
Preserve them, right.
Like, what could possibly be going on in someone's mind
Right. Yeah.
to do something like that?
I think that's one of the most disturbing. Yeah.
Aspects of this whole case.
Yeah.
And it speaks to this level of kind of psychological complexity
Yeah.
that's really hard to grasp.
Right.
And in the article, touches on this, but it doesn't really go into the potential reasons behind it.
Yeah.
But one theory is that it could be about control.
Control. You mean like having power over the victims
Exactly.
even after death?
Yes. Nilsen had a very troubled childhood, marked by, abandonment and loss. And so it's possible that keeping the bodies was
Right.
a way of, maintaining this twisted sense of connection.
Wow.
A way of preventing these people from leaving him again.
That's a really disturbing thought. And is that common among serial killers?
It's a pattern that we see in a lot of cases.
Okay.
This desire to exert power, to manipulate, to be the one in charge.
Right.
And this need for control can manifest in, different ways.
Yeah. And in Nilsen's case, it seems to have taken a particularly gruesome form.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine that level of detachment required to do something like that. And the article mentions that even Nilsen's taped confessions, while they offer some insight into his thoughts, they seem calculated at times. It's like he's trying to manage his image even from prison.
Yeah, almost like he's constructing a narrative,
Right.
Shaping how he wants to be perceived.
Yeah.
And that really raises a crucial question. Are we truly getting this honest glimpse into his mind?
Right.
Or is this just a carefully crafted performance designed to, fuel his infamy?
Yeah. So how do we even begin to separate the truth from the manipulation?
Right.
Especially when we're dealing with someone as cunning and self-aware as Nilsen seems to have been.
It's tough, and it requires careful analysis. It requires a deep understanding of criminal psychology, and it requires a healthy dose of skepticism, I think.
Right. We have to be aware of the potential for deception, especially when we're dealing with individuals who have shown a propensity for it.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly trying to unravel a puzzle where some of the pieces are deliberately misleading.
Exactly. And we may never have all the pieces,
Right.
which makes it all the more important to scrutinize the ones we do have.
Yeah. This is already a lot to unpack, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Well, I think we've laid the groundwork.
Okay.
But there's still much more to explore,
Right.
The societal factors, the police investigation, the psychology of Nilsen himself. These are all interconnected threads that we need to carefully untangle.
Well, you know what that means. We're going to need to dive even deeper in part 2.
Definitely.
So stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
So we're back, and I got to say, this whole idea of Nilsen controlling his narrative, even from prison, it's really stuck with me.
Yeah. The article, it touched on how he almost intellectualized his crimes, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the, most fascinating and maybe disturbing aspects of his personality. It's like he was trying to elevate himself, portray his actions as something more complex than these brutal murders they actually were.
It's like he wanted to be seen as some kind of criminal mastermind, but without the mastermind part, because honestly, some of his actions seem almost impulsive.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation, and it gets to the heart of what makes Nilsen so difficult to categorize.
Right.
On the one hand, you have this clear attempt to construct a narrative, to present himself as a certain type of person.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's this rawness, this brutality to his crimes that seems at odds with that carefully crafted image.
So how do we reconcile those two sides then?
Right.
Was it all an act, or was there something more going on beneath the surface?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that, criminal profilers and psychologists have been grappling with for decades.
Yeah.
One theory is that this tendency to intellectualize, to create these elaborate narratives, could be a defense mechanism, a way to kind of distance himself from the horrific reality of his actions.
So instead of facing the true horror of what he'd done, he created this fantasy world where he was something more than a cold-blooded killer.
It's possible, yeah. And it's also worth noting that Nilsen was a voracious reader.
Oh, okay.
Particularly interested in philosophy and psychology.
Interesting.
So it's conceivable that he drew upon those readings to, construct his self-image, to try and make sense of his own darkness.
It's almost like he was trying to write his own psychological profile, but with a more flattering slant, let's say.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it underscores the challenge we face when trying to understand, individuals like Nilsen.
Great.
We're relying on their own words, their own interpretations of events, which may be heavily biased or even outright fabrications.
So how do we, as outsiders looking in, how do we even begin to separate fact from fiction?
Yeah.
Especially when we're dealing with someone who seems to have been so adept at manipulation.
Well, it requires a multifaceted approach, right?
Yep.
We have to consider the physical evidence, the testimony of witnesses, the psychological assessments, and yes, even the words of the perpetrator.
Yeah.
But we have to do so with a critical eye, always aware of the potential for distortion and deception.
It's like trying to piece together a shattered mirror.
Yeah.
You might be able to get a glimpse of the reflection, but it's never going to be complete or entirely accurate.
That's a powerful analogy. And it highlights the inherent limitations we face when trying to penetrate the minds of those who commit such heinous acts,
Yeah.
We may never have a complete understanding, and that can be a frustrating but also a necessary realization.
It's definitely humbling, to say the least.
It is.
And it makes you realize that there's a whole lot we still don't know about the dark side of human nature.
Absolutely. Cases like Nilsen's, they they force us to confront this uncomfortable truth that evil can wear many masks and that sometimes the most ordinary seeming individuals can harbor the most disturbing secrets.
Yeah, that's a thought that's going to stay with me for a while, I think. And it brings us back to the ethical dilemma we talked about earlier.
Right.
By giving Nilsen this platform, even through these archival recordings, are we inadvertently feeding into his need for attention, for notoriety?
It's a question that we as consumers of true crime we have to grapple with, you know. There's a natural curiosity, a desire to understand the motivations behind these horrific acts.
Of course.
But we have to be mindful of the potential consequences of giving a voice to someone who used their voice to manipulate and harm.
So how do we strike that balance then between satisfying our curiosity and ensuring that we're not glorifying the perpetrator or minimizing the suffering of the victims?
Yeah, it's a difficult line to walk, and there's no easy answer. One approach is to focus on the victims, to tell their stories, to honor their memories. Another is to approach true crime with a critical lens, to be aware of the potential for bias and manipulation, both from the creators of the content and from the perpetrators themselves.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
It's about being informed consumers, right?
Absolutely.
Not just passively absorbing the information, but actively questioning it, analyzing it, considering its potential impact.
Exactly. True crime can be a powerful tool for learning about the complexities of human behavior and the failings of our systems, but it's essential to approach it with a sense of responsibility, awareness, and empathy.
Okay, so we've talked about Nilsen's attempts to control his narrative, the possibility that he was intellectualizing his crimes as a defense mechanism, and the ethical implications of giving him a platform.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about his personality, his background, that you think might shed light on his actions?
You know, one thing that the article only briefly mentions, but I think is worth exploring further is Nilsen's complex relationship with his own sexuality.
Oh, okay.
He struggled with internalized homophobia.
Okay.
And this may have played a role in his choice of victims and the way he treated them.
That's a really interesting point. It adds another layer of complexity to an already incredibly complex case.
Yeah.
Do you think that internalized homophobia could have manifested as a kind of self-loathing?
It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
And that this self-loathing was somehow projected onto his victims. It's certainly a possibility, and it's something that would require, a deeper dive into Nilsen's personal history, his relationships, and his own writings to fully understand.
Yeah.
It's a line of inquiry that could potentially yield valuable insights.
I think it's a vital one, especially considering the societal context of the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Homophobia was so pervasive, and it's hard to imagine how that wouldn't have impacted someone like Nilsen, who is clearly struggling with his own identity.
Absolutely, and it's a reminder that these cases don't exist in a vacuum, right? They're products of their time, influenced by the social, cultural, and political forces at play.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored Nilsen's psychology, his motivations, and the broader context in which his crimes took place.
Yeah.
But I'm still left with this lingering question. How do we make sense of someone who seems so ordinary on the surface, yet capable of such extraordinary acts of cruelty?
That's the enduring mystery of cases like this, isn't it?
Yeah.
The realization that evil can lurk beneath the most mundane facades, and that sometimes the people we least suspect can be capable of the most unimaginable acts.
It's fascinating how this deep dive is really challenged, like my assumptions about what a monster looks like. We tend to imagine, serial killers as these larger-than-life figures. But Nilsen was just like blending into society.
Yeah, it's a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask,
Right.
It can hide in plain sight behind the seemingly ordinary facade.
Right.
And I think that's what makes Nilsen so unsettling, you know. He dismantles our preconceived notions of what a killer should be.
Yeah, and that makes me think about, the documentary itself using Nilsen's own recordings.
Right.
Is it truly giving us insight into the mind of a killer?
Right.
Or is it just amplifying his infamy?
Yeah.
Giving him exactly what he might have wanted, attention, even after death?
That's the question that lingers, isn't it? Are we as viewers complicit in perpetuating his notoriety by engaging with this material?
Right.
Or is there genuine value in trying to understand the darkness that drove him, even if it means hearing his voice, his justifications?
I'm grappling with that myself,
Yeah.
On the one hand, I'm drawn to true crime because I want to understand the why,
Right.
But on the other hand, I don't want to contribute to a culture that potentially glorifies these individuals.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to be mindful of the victims in all of this,
Oh, absolutely.
Their stories, their suffering should never be overshadowed by the notoriety of the perpetrator.
Absolutely. We can't lose sight of the human cost of these crimes.
Right.
The families left behind, the lives cut short.
Right.
That's something I keep coming back to as we delve deeper into this case.
Yeah, it's essential to remember that at the heart of every true crime story are real people who experience unimaginable loss and pain.
Right.
Their stories deserve to be told, their memories honored.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I think the question that remains for all of us is this.
Mm-hmm.
How do we engage with true crime responsibly?
Right.
How do we learn from these cases without exploiting them or contributing to the notoriety of the perpetrators?
It's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
Perhaps it starts with being conscious of our motivations for consuming true crime content.
Yeah.
Are we seeking understanding, empathy, or simply entertainment?
Right.
And how can we ensure that our engagement doesn't come at the expense of the victims and their families?
That's a powerful takeaway.
Yeah.
We can't just passively absorb these stories.
Right.
We have to actively engage with them, question them, consider their ethical implications.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, we have to remember the human beings at the heart of it all.
Well said. It's about finding that balance between, satisfying our curiosity and upholding the dignity of those who've been harmed.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful, albeit disturbing.
Yeah.
I think I'll be thinking about Dennis Nilsen and the complex questions his case raises for a long time to come.
As will I, and perhaps that's the most valuable outcome of these explorations, to be left with more questions than answers, to continue grappling with the complexities of human nature long after the episode ends.
Yeah, thanks for joining me on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, remember, sometimes the most unsettling mysteries are the ones we carry with us. The ones that force us to confront the darkness within ourselves and the world around us.